It is 1781. A British army of 8,000 men stands trapped at Yorktown. Lord Cornwallis waits for rescue. It never comes. America had already won the War of Deception. How did a ragged colonial army outthink the most powerful empire on earth? Stay with us. To understand this, we go back 50 years. Britain ruled the American colonies with quiet arrogance. London saw the colonies as a source of revenue, not a partner. That mistake would prove fatal. The colonists were expected to pay taxes for wars they never chose. Resentment built slowly. By the 1760s, that resentment had a name. It was called liberty, and it was spreading fast. Parliament passed the Stamp Act in 1765. Every legal document, newspaper, and pamphlet faced attacks. The colonies erupted, not just in anger, but in organized, strategic resistance. Britain underestimated this. London assumed the protests would fade. They did not understand what they were truly facing. Colonial leaders were not simply angry farmers. Many were lawyers, merchants, and brilliant strategists. Men like Benjamin Franklin had spent years studying British politics from the inside. He knew its weaknesses. Franklin lived in London as a colonial agent. He watched, listened, and learned how Britain thought. If you find this story as fascinating as we do, stay until the end. It only gets deeper. When war finally broke out in April 1775, Britain expected a short, sharp campaign. A quick lesson. General Thomas Gage commanded British forces in Boston. He believed the rebels would scatter quickly. He was wrong. At Concord and Lexington, colonial militiamen stood their ground with shocking discipline. Britain controlled the cities, but America controlled the countryside. That geography would define the war. The Continental Congress appointed George Washington as commander-in-chief in June 1775. Washington was not the most experienced general available, but he had something rarer than experience. He had patience. He understood that America did not need to win every battle. Britain did. This was the core of America's greatest deception. Make Britain fight forever at enormous cost. Washington called it a war of posts. Hold ground, retreat when necessary, survive above all else. Britain needed a decisive victory to justify the cost of the war to Parliament and the public. Washington denied them that victory again and again through cunning, retreat, and calculated delay. The British strategy had a deep flaw from the beginning. They assumed loyalty existed across the colonies. They believed thousands of American loyalists would rise up and help pacify the rebellious regions. Some did, but never in the numbers Britain needed. The loyalist promise was a mirage. American commanders exploited this. They spread rumors, intercepted communications, and fed British commanders false intelligence. One of the war's great deceivers was General Charles Lee, though not always for America's benefit. But the true master of strategic deception was Washington himself, operating across years, not days. At the Battle of Long Island in 1776, Washington faced disaster. His army was nearly surrounded. 9,000 men were trapped. The East River was behind them. British forces closed in on every side. Then fog rolled in, dense, cold, and perfectly timed. Washington ordered a silent night evacuation by boat. By dawn, the entire Continental Army had vanished across the river. British officers were stunned. Britain had expected to end the war that night. Instead, Washington had disappeared into the mist. Comment below if you think that fog saved American independence. Many historians believe it did. Washington followed the retreat with a bold counterstroke. On Christmas night 1776, he crossed the Delaware. The river was choked with ice. The night was brutal. His men were exhausted, freezing, and underfed. They marched through a blizzard and attacked Hessian troops at Trenton before dawn. Complete surprise. The victory was militarily small, but psychologically it was enormous. The revolution was still alive. Britain consistently misjudged the resilience of the Continental Army. They kept expecting it to collapse. General William Howe had chances to destroy Washington's forces entirely. He did not press them. Historians still debate why Howe held back. Perhaps he hoped the colonists would negotiate a peace. Perhaps he was simply too cautious. Either way, his hesitation gave Washington room to survive and rebuild. American intelligence operations were also quietly reshaping the war in ways Britain never fully detected. Washington established what became known as the Culper Spy Ring, operating in and around New York. Ordinary citizens, a farmer, a merchant, a woman named Anna Strong, fed information to the Continental cause. Anna Strong used laundry on her clothesline to signal where secret messages had been hidden. Simple, brilliant. The British had professional intelligence officers. America had neighbors who blended into every crowd. Britain never cracked the Culper ring. Washington received intelligence about British troop movements for years. Subscribe if history like this deserves more attention. There is so much that never gets told. Meanwhile, American diplomats were fighting a parallel war on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Benjamin Franklin arrived in Paris in December 1776 as America's representative to the French court. He was 70 years old. He wore a fur cap instead of a powdered wig. Paris adored him instantly. Franklin understood that America could not defeat Britain alone. France was the key to everything. France and Britain were ancient rivals. The humiliation of the 7 Years' War still burned in Versailles. Franklin did not beg France for help. He made it seem inevitable that France would want to join. He played French pride, French ambition, and French fear of a powerful, reunited British Empire. When news of the American victory at Saratoga reached Paris in December 1777, Franklin moved instantly. Saratoga was not just a battle. A British general, John Burgoyne, had surrendered an entire army. 6,000 British and Hessian soldiers laid down their arms in upstate New York. The world watched. France now believed America could actually win. Franklin had been waiting for exactly this moment. Within weeks, France and America signed a treaty of amity and commerce in February 1778. France recognized American independence and pledged military support. Britain suddenly faced a world war. This was the Second Great Deception. America had transformed a colonial rebellion into a global conflict. Britain was now fighting France, Spain, and the Netherlands simultaneously, stretched across 3 oceans. The war in North America became just one theater in a far larger and more expensive struggle. And still, Britain's commanders in America failed to grasp the shift in the strategic situation they faced. General Henry Clinton replaced Howe in 1778. He faced an impossible task with dwindling resources. Britain could no longer concentrate its full power in America. The Royal Navy was stretched dangerously thin. Washington knew this. He watched and waited, keeping his army intact, frustrating every British initiative. In the South, Britain tried a new strategy. They believed Southern loyalists would pacify Georgia and the Carolinas. General Cornwallis swept through the South with brutal efficiency. He won battle after battle. Camden, 1780. The American Southern Army under Horatio Gates was shattered. Gates himself fled on horseback. Britain celebrated. Clinton declared the South pacified. It was a premature and catastrophic conclusion. What Cornwallis had won were battles. What he was losing, slowly and invisibly, was control of the land. Guerrilla commanders like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, struck British supply lines and vanished into swamps. Marion's men were farmers and hunters. They knew every creek, every forest path, every hiding place. British regulars, trained for open field warfare, were powerless against this kind of dispersed mobile resistance. Cornwallis burned supply depots, hanged rebels, and punished loyalist communities suspected of wavering loyalty. Each act of reprisal turned more colonists against the crown. Britain was losing the population it needed. At Kings Mountain in October 1780, loyalist forces were crushed by frontier riflemen in a single afternoon. At Cowpens in January 1781, General Daniel Morgan executed a tactical masterpiece against Banastre Tarleton. Morgan deliberately placed his least reliable troops in front. They fired 2 volleys, then retreated as planned. Tarleton's men charged forward, believing the Americans were breaking. They ran straight into a trap. Continental regulars and cavalry hit them on both flanks simultaneously. In under an hour, it was over. Tarleton's force was destroyed. Cornwallis had lost another irreplaceable army in the field. This is the kind of strategy that textbooks barely capture. If you want more stories like this, subscribe. Cornwallis made a fateful decision in the spring of 1781. He marched his army into Virginia. He believed Virginia was the economic heart of the rebellion. Destroy it, and America would finally surrender. He established a base at Yorktown on the Virginia Peninsula, waiting for naval support from the British fleet. Washington saw the opportunity immediately. This was the moment he had been waiting for since 1775. Working with French General Rochambeau, Washington began planning the most sophisticated deception of the entire war. He needed to move his combined Franco-American army from New York to Virginia, almost 700 miles away. But Clinton in New York must not know they were leaving. If Clinton reinforced Cornwallis, all was lost. Washington ordered fake dispatches to be written and then deliberately allowed them to fall into British hands. The documents described plans for a major attack on New York. Clinton read them and believed every word. Construction of fake bakeries and supply depots began in New Jersey, visible to British scouts across the river. Clinton watched the preparations with growing alarm. He held his forces in New York, waiting for the assault. Meanwhile, Washington and Rochambeau quietly slipped south through New Jersey on August 19, 1781. Clinton did not realize Washington was gone until the Franco-American army was already days away. By then, it was too late. The trap was already closing around Cornwallis at Yorktown. But there was one more piece that had to fall into place. Everything depended on the French fleet. Admiral de Grasse commanded a powerful French naval squadron in the Caribbean. He had to reach Virginia first. The British Admiral Graves raced to stop him. They met at the Battle of the Chesapeake on September 5th. The two fleets exchanged fire for 2 hours. The battle was tactically indecisive, but strategically it was everything. De Grasse held the Chesapeake Bay. The British fleet withdrew to New York for repairs. Cornwallis was sealed in. There would be no British rescue, no supplies, no reinforcements. 8,000 men surrounded on a Virginia peninsula. Washington arrived at Yorktown on September 14th. French and American forces completed the siege lines by early October. The bombardment began on October 9th. French and American artillery pounded the British works day and night. British defenses crumbled under the continuous fire. The outer redoubts fell within days of each other. On October 17, 1781, a lone British drummer boy appeared on the ramparts, beating a signal for parley. The guns fell silent. After 6 years of war, the most powerful empire on earth was asking to talk. On October 19, Cornwallis surrendered his entire army. He claimed illness and sent a subordinate in his place. The British band played a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." It could not have been more fitting. Washington had begun this war with barely trained militia and almost no money, supplies, or allies. He had fought the greatest military power of the 18th century to a standstill through patience and deception. Franklin had turned a domestic rebellion into a global war that Britain could not afford to sustain. The spy rings, the false dispatches, the deliberate retreats, the guerrilla fighters in the Carolina swamps. Every piece had been part of a larger strategy that Britain, blinded by its own certainty, never fully understood. Peace negotiations began in Paris. The final treaty was signed on September 3, 1783. Britain recognized the independence of the United States of America from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River. The empire that had ruled a third of the known world had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and ultimately outfoxed. Not by a superior army, not by greater wealth, but by men who understood that cleverness outlasts power, and that from the fog on the East River to the silent march through New Jersey is how America fooled Britain.